Millennials remaking their neighborhoods in southwestern Ontario, consideration of renaming streets in northwest Ontario. Time to check in with our Ontario hubs about the stories we're working on. Joining us now from our studio at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, Ontario, John Thompson in our Northwest Ontario hub, and via Skype from Western University in London, Ontario, Mary Baxter in our Southwest Ontario hub. And it's good to see you two both on the line from your various parts of our province. Mary, you sit tight for a little bit. John, I'm going to start with you. Not too long ago, we had a bit of a discussion here about the advisability of taking Sir John A. Macdonald's name off schools around the province. And now I gather there are some roads in your part of the province where they're having a similar debate. What's the name of the roads, and give us the flavor of the debate?
The debate is about colonization roads. The colonization roads came originally from the Public Lands Act of 1853, which, to stem emigration to the United States, were designed to provide plots of land for people willing to settle and farm along areas that didn't yet have roads running to them.
Why did it seem like a good idea for a road named Colonization Road back in the day?
Well, it was a matter of colonizing country and terra nullius, and a matter of conquering the wilderness that would become Canada. That was sort of the broad thinking of the time. And so you had people coming from all over the place being promised free land, and they built 1,600 kilometers of these colonization roads. Most of those have since been renamed elsewhere in the province, but in Northern Ontario there's still a good number of roads still called Colonization Road.
And are there people who are reevaluating the advisability of having that name on the roads today?
Well, colonization really has a couple of different definitions now. The first is the one that I just expressed, and the second is subjugation of Indigenous peoples and appropriation of lands. And Canada has a history with Indigenous peoples that has put settler populations and Indigenous communities at odds in that way. And so what's happening in those communities now that are debating this in Kenora and Fort Frances is they're evaluating the two different definitions of the word and trying to evaluate where they are as a community and what they want to do about it.
So let me make sure I got this straight. For the so-called settler community, colonization means one thing. It refers to taming the wilderness and so on. But Indigenous people in Northwest Ontario clearly see something else and something more nefarious. Is that right?
Well, and I think it's safe to say that that's not exclusively Indigenous people who feel that way. But it's a different way of looking at Canada. Conrad Black recently was talking about these kinds of debates that you were referencing earlier, and talking about the legitimacy of Canada as a whole. And I think that's what the debate is really about, is if colonization was deliberate and the right thing to have done, then there's issues of legitimacy for municipalities and issues of legitimacy for First Nations, some of which are literally touching each other at the edge, that run along these colonization roads quite literally.
So, John, this has turned into a debate about much more than just what name to put on a road. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And I think it's happening in large part around a debate across Northwestern Ontario about reconciliation. This is in most communities beginning in earnest now. And Fort Frances is not looking like they're going to change Colonization Road at this time. Kenora is most certainly going to. There was almost no debate at all. But this is happening against an understanding that in Canada as a whole, that our communities can be written off as racist, these municipalities. And that's easy to say if you just want to, turn the TV off and walk away. But none of us can walk away from this situation. And there is no place in Canada where this relationship is being practiced in earnest or in a model way. And even if there was, we'd have to do it differently because of the geographic constraints and opportunities of municipalities, First Nations, and the land that surrounds them.
Okay, John, in my last couple of minutes with you, let me raise one more issue, and that is there were some comments made by a Conservative senator in the Senate, I guess last week or the week before, not too long ago in any event, Lynn Bayak, or Bayak. Is it Bayak? I think it is actually. Lynn Bayak?
It's Bayek.
Yeah. And why don't you refresh our memory about what the comments were and why they have caused so much fuss since she made them?
Senator Bayek made a long-winded speech to the Senate some time ago, talking about the good in residential schools. So when the federal government split the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada into two departments, she used that as an opportunity to issue a press release that once again reinvigorated that debate. And the municipal leaders of Northwestern Ontario, and this is tied to what we're talking about with Colonization Road, passed a resolution yesterday in Thunder Bay at their municipal meeting that was asking for that senator to step down. Because those comments that she's making, that Indigenous people should trade in their status cards for citizenship, is being described as untrue and at the very least not helpful to the reconciliation efforts that those municipalities are under and the very real challenges that they face. I mean, the communities here, all of us, are really struggling with this. And I think to have, for what they're saying and what the MP Bob Nault has said and a number of senators have said, is that those comments by Senator Bayak are not helpful. She is the only senator that represents Northwestern Ontario. And the voices are growing out here to have her resign. And
just finally, John, what has she said in response to those who have said she ought to resign over this?
Every article you can find on this will tell you that she is not answering phones, that her email is full, that she's not participating in media interviews whatsoever. She has been stripped of her membership on all committees, and even in her hometown, the Dryden Observer, the weekly newspaper there, printed an editorial that was very honest and very vulnerable, talking about how, you know, sometimes people, non-Indigenous people, are feeling the way that she's feeling. Nobody's willing to talk about that, but here's why it's wrong, is because it makes you feel uncomfortable and you know it. And I think that if that's happening in Dryden, I assure you it's happening everywhere in Northwestern Ontario. Okay, John, we will thank you to keep on top of this story and may revisit it in the weeks ahead. Thanks for your report there. Let's now go to Southwestern Ontario. Mary Baxter is our hub captain down there. And Mary, last week we, I guess, started a conversation about neighborhood associations in Southwest Ontario and why they were proliferating. And I guess I got some feedback from people who wanted to know, first of all, what a neighborhood association was. They hadn't heard the expression before. So maybe before we follow up on that conversation, you can just give us your best definition of what a neighborhood association actually does.
Well, Steve, a neighborhood association or a community association, they're sometimes referred to as that, is usually an organization that is self-organized, and they're often responding to an external threat. So what I mean by that, that sounds really ominous, but what I mean by that is maybe there's a development that's coming into the community and people are responding to that, or they're wanting to add a recreational element to their community. And they often monitor what's happening on the municipal end of things in terms of government. And again, they might be involved in recreational elements as well, maybe operating a local skating rink, something like that.
Now, I know, for example, the neighborhood association that is that represents the neighborhood that this station is in the middle of Toronto, I think it's fair to say, is staffed mostly by people who tend to be retired, who may have more time on their hands to get involved in these kinds of things. And the notion of millennials spending any time involved in this is really fanciful. What are you finding in your neck of the woods?
Well, actually, we're finding millennials are getting involved. It's rather interesting. As you mentioned, we don't tend to think of millennials getting involved. Millennials actually have a really poor reputation about involvement. I have a quote here from a Time magazine article a few years ago that called them lazy, entitled, selfish, and shallow. Ouch. But political statistics are also kind of showing it, like in the last federal election and the last provincial election, we've seen lower voter turnout in that age group. And when we're talking millennials, people have different ideas about what that age group is. Usually starts somewhere around, they're born somewhere around 1980. Some people say it cuts off at 1995, and other people say it cuts off at maybe 2000 for births. But you know, community organization statistics, federal statistics are telling a little bit of a different story about millennial involvement in their communities. So in 2013, for instance, people who were aged 15 to 19, 74% of them, and people aged 20 to 24, 64% of them, they were involved in a community group, organization, or an association. So you'd often see them in groups and still see them in groups like environmental organizations.
So you've been sniffing around the story and you're discovering that millennials, there may be more to them than just that self-centered entitledness that we like to stereotype. They, in fact, are involved in this. Is that right?
Yeah, they're greatly involved. Here in London, it's really interesting to see the number of millennials involved. I spoke to Skylar Frank, for instance. She's 26 and she lives in West London. And she and her husband started a community association, earlier this year, I think it was. And they wanted to meet their neighbors. That's what started it off.
Now, they always often say that say a position on the school board is a good springboard to get into more formal politics. How about these neighborhood associations? Could they be a springboard into more formal politics as well?
Well, they're certainly on the municipal scale. We've known that for a number of years. We often see people come through the ranks of neighborhood associations to find a seat on a municipal council. And it appears that with millennials, they're also seeing that as a route. I also talked to Tanya Park. She's a London city councillor. She was elected in the last 2014 election. She's now 33. She first got involved in her neighborhood association in 2010, and she was just in her mid 20s. And she ended up being the president of that, and then was convinced by a councillor who was retiring to try for the municipal election. And she was one of six, would you believe it, new councillors elected that were age 36 or under at the time of their election.
Huh. So many paths into politics, and maybe this is a new one that we need to pay a little more attention to.
I would think so.
Okay.
It's exciting.
Give us, we got about a minute and a half here, give us just a heads up on the next thing that you're going to be doing for us on the website. The emerald ash borer is what I'm told you're going to be writing about, and I don't know what that is. So why don't you start by telling us?
The emerald ash borer is this teeny little beetle. It's I think about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters. It's emerald, and it eats the wood just right underneath the bark of an ash tree, and that kills the ash tree because it kills its vascular system. And it sprang onto the scene in Windsor about 15 years ago and has since munched its way through most of Ontario. It's in Eastern Ontario now, it's in Quebec, and there's been a spot up in Thunder Bay. So I'm looking at the legacy of the emerald ash borer, how we responded to it, what lessons have we learned, because we're experiencing more and more of these types of events, and it was a big one.
And just finally, Mary, is this, I mean, is this dangerous? Does this have the potential to wipe out some of what you've been describing?
Yes, actually, when you look at the emerald ash borer, it is one of the two potential extinction threatening events for trees here in Ontario.
Okay, well, we got to read that piece because we need to know more about that. We look forward to seeing that on the website. I want to thank John Thompson in our Northwestern Ontario hub and Mary Baxter in our Southwestern Ontario hub. 2 of our Ontario hubs down, 2 more still to come in the future. So everybody stay tuned to this space. Good to see you 2 again. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.